Hello, this is Dr. Roger L. Martínez-Davila. This lecture pertains to royal, municipal, church, and private documents, and we'll be exploring alphabets, archives, and manuscripts from Spain. A quick overview. First, we'll talk about recording history and this evolution of alphabets, the creation of parchment, and the appearance of paper. Second, we'll talk about the hunt for documents, the historian's quest. And lastly, types of documents: royal, municipal, church, and private. Recording history begins with thinking about alphabets, and the development of the Latin alphabet and grammar is a product of Roman civilization, beginning as early as 754 BCE, before the Common Era, to 467 during the Common Era. The development of Latin is subdivided into three periods: the Archaic series, the Classic series, and the New series. This is just a little bit of background about the origins of the alphabet that we use in the Western world. Now, we can think about how we move from Rome and into the medieval era and start to look at some examples of influences and transformations in script. One script we might consider is the Roman or Romana capital script from the 5th century. And here you can see a little excerpt from Vergil Maro's 5th century manuscript, Eclogues. And you can see very quickly some underlined text here: dom sedat, gracili, vos, and facitis. So you can see this is a very early Roman script at the beginning of the medieval era. We can enjoy some of these texts as well, and this is just that little excerpt that we were looking at. And here's the English selection. You'll see the underlined section, which is the exact quote. And I'll just read a little bit of this to you. Love conquers all things. Yield we to love. These songs, Parian made, shall it suffice your poet to have sung the while he sat, and of slim mallow wove a basket fine. To Gallus ye will magnify their worth. Just a little excerpt there. Another script that we can consider is the Visigothic or visigoda capital script, and it shares much in common with the Roman script. This is from a codices, the Codices Oventense and the Bibliothèque de Escorial, Philip II's personal palace. And you can see some underlined text here that would be very recognizable, like nos, N-O-S. You'll see turbida, primont, emilite. What's nice about these early scripts, and what is quite shocking when you think about the idea of paleography or of interpreting ancient writings or writing in general, is the incredible readability of early scripts. It's as time passes that the scripts become more elaborate. They start to break down and fragment into their own naturalized styles for different regions, and they go through their own life cycles. So often it's quite nice to read an early script. Another script that we can consider that is influencing Spain are the French or the francesa scripts. And here you can start to see this degeneration, or it's really not a degeneration, that's improper to say that, but an evolution of text. So you can see, in this case, some abbreviations starting to show up. For example, quis, Q-U-I-S, is abbreviated above with just two letters and a little squiggle there. Or nostrum, the second word in the first line, is abbreviated with just NRM with another squiggle. And this is very common during the Middle Ages, and as you can imagine, why would that be? Well, Pergamino or Parchment is incredibly hard to find, or I should say incredibly difficult to produce and expensive. So it's a good idea to conserve paper by abbreviating. And you can also see some of these other words along the way. You can always pause the video if you like, just to take a look at it a little closer. One thing to consider is there are a variety of French scripts, and they kind of fall into a general category that you could be considered Gaelic, pre-Carolingian, and Carolingian. I encourage you to look into that if you're interested in those very specific details. Another script that we can consider as we get closer to the period we're studying in medieval Spain, in Plasencia, is the privilegios script or privilege script. It appears in the 13th century and it's relatively readable as well. So you'll see this wonderful Alfonso, and it says, Don Alfonso por la gracia de Dios, rey de Castilla, de Toledo, de León, de Galicia, de Sevilla, de Cordova, de Murcia. And you can see very clearly here the Alfonso clearly indicating this is King Alfonso. And then we see some of these abbreviations showing up again. Gracia is a good example. And then we see some unusual lettering here. You can see Leon. The L in Leon almost looks like an R, but it's just a little bit of a variation. And then Murcia. That M is a little bit tricky because that line comes the end of the M comes so far down. Another script that we take a close look at is one of courtesana, and it's a very common script during the 1400s and 1500s, and one that we will consider during this class. And specifically, you can see this is an extracted item from an accounting from 1480, so it's quite late. And it's now starting to become a little bit more cursive, right? It's becoming more flowing, and we're seeing lots of variations. So let's just pick up on a couple of these. First, we'll see Fernando and Fernando de Cifuentes. So you see that Fernando, F-E-R, and there's a little bit of breakdown there, and where the N would be an R, a D, and an O. So one of the things we find out as we start to think about paleography is when we see abbreviations in words, the general rule of thumb is that if a word is abbreviated, that probably means it's a very common word, or it is the most common word that would have those letters in it. So in this case, if you see Fernando, well, that's going to be most likely going to be that name because it is the most common with those letters in it, and you can kind of infer. Other things we'll see are like 20. This is the second word, and it's not so much abbreviated, but then we just see this unusual V-E-Y-T N-T-E. It's a bit confusing there because the N looks more like an R. So it almost looks like a V-E-Y-R-E-E. But the way the letters come together, it's really saying 20 or 20. Now, one of the most unusual kind of and most common, it's unusual in the sense that, the first time you encounter it, it's quite shocking. But after that, it becomes immediately recognizable and becomes common. And that is this word, maravedís. This is the third word in this line, and that is just literally a reference to that form of coinage. And you can see it just looks like an MRS with a squiggle above. That's the most common abbreviation for maravedís, and generally it will make easy for you. All right. The last script I think we want to look at would be redonda or Hurros script, which you might kind of translate kind of poorly as rounded or rights script, pertaining to rights and responsibilities. It's another 14th and 15th century script, and here it is also a little bit more readable, kind of in some ways looks more common to our eyes, maybe more of the letters we recognize in this 21st century, and things we can just point out. Here it says yo, so I, Palomba, which is a name. Then you can see the second line, Yuda. So Yuda is a first name. And then Degasi, mi marido. So it's saying Yuda Degasi, my husband. And then you can see a primeramente there, which is abbreviated a little bit. So this looks very interesting as well. All right, let's continue along. So I'd like you to consider this evolution of alphabets. And this is from, and we've been looking at examples from Muñoz and Rivero's Manual de Paleografía Diplomática Española. It's an excellent text from the 1880s, one that we can use because it is out of copyright. And this is my personal copy that I ordered many years ago as I began my epigraphic journeys. And I just wanted to highlight this one because it's pretty interesting just to see the change in writing, and in some ways, not so many changes in writing in terms of the alphabet. So we can look at that first line. So siglo XII, or the 12th century, we see A. Then the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, some little bit of more variation. We get to the 16th century, and then you can follow it on from there and get a good sense of what's happening. Let's look here. Just highlighting over here siglo XIV and siglo XV, which is on the right-hand side. You can see a nice depiction of A's, and then the second row would be, in this case, like I's and J's, and then lastly some M's. Now let's talk a little bit about parchment, also known as Pergamino in Spanish. And what we know about Pergamino or parchment is quite a bit. So let me just read a small excerpt for you from Michelle Brown's text, Understanding Limited Manuscripts, A Guide to Technical Terms. It's a text I picked up in New York several years ago at the Cloisters in New York City. It's a quite wonderful museum to visit to see a medieval, all kinds of different medieval artifacts and architecture. I highly encourage you to visit it if you're in the States. But let's just read a little bit about parchment. So parchment, a writing support material that derives its name from Pergamon or Bergama in modern Turkey, an early production center. The term is often generically to denote animal skin prepared to receive writing, although it is more correctly applied only to sheep and goat skin, with the term vellum reserved for calf skin. Uterine vellum, the skin of stillborn or very young calves, is characterized by its small size and particularly fine, white appearance. However, it was rarely used. To produce parchment or vellum, the animal skins were defleshed in a bath of lime, stretched on a frame, and scraped with a lunar knife while damp. They could then be treated with pumice, whitened with a substance such as chalk, and cut to size. Differences in preparation technique seem to have occasioned greater diversity in appearance than did the type of skin used. Parchment supplanted papyrus as the most popular writing support material in the 4th century, although it was known earlier. Parchment was itself largely replaced by paper in the 16th century with a rise in printing, but remained in use for certain high-grade books. So that is just a quick overview, and you can see in these two images, you can see this gentleman removing the animal fibers from the animal skin, and then in the second picture, you can see that the skin has been stretched out on a frame, and he's using this knife, this lunar shaped knife, to kind of scrape it and kind of get that as fine as possible. The next image is a close-up of parchment, and this one is of a goatskin parchment stretched on the wooden frame, and you can see how it's kind of tied to these wooden pieces and then pulled very tight, and it would be continued to be pulled tighter and tighter as it was being worked. So you can also see a little bit of the follicles on the parchment, and in this case, what's interesting about it is that we know that there's a flesh side and there's a hair side, and you can imagine which one's the better side to write in, although both sides would be used. It's really interesting to see these in your hands and to touch them because you realize just how much this is a natural product. I would encourage you to visit the Paul Getty Museum and view their video of the entire process of creating parchment. It's quite a nice video. It's thegetty.edu. There's a link on coursera.org, as well as you can consider just typing in this address down here if you've found this video in another way. We should also speak a little bit about paper in Spain because it had a pretty significant impact in Spain much earlier than in other places in Europe. Specifically, then, the Islamic civilization introduced Chinese paper making to Spain by the middle of the 10th centuries of the Common Era, or the 950s. So it's a fairly early kind of development. And rag parchment, or made from cloth scraps, was produced in large water-powered mills. We also know that the center of Islamic paper making in Spain was Hativa, sorry about that, near Valencia. And this is an image of the castle in the city there. We also can appreciate that in the rest of Europe, paper was relatively uncommon during these early periods, and we don't see it being produced locally until a little bit later, a good 150 years later. First in Italy in the 1100s, which makes good sense because of the Islamic influences in Sicily and to the south, Switzerland and France during the 1200s and 1300s, and finally in England by the 1400s. So you can see this is a natural process of moving north. Again, what's important to, I think, mention about Spain is that paper was in substantial use in Spain very early on, and a lot of documentation that you will encounter in archives during these Middle Ages is paper. So it's quite interesting to have both of these materials available to you. So let's talk a little about the hunt for documents. And this is kind of important because, it's one thing to kind of appreciate alphabets and appreciate how parchment is prepared or paper is prepared, but that's really the essential technical details. As an historian, it's really a much more challenging process, and this is what really makes us tick in terms of finding materials. So we use different things that are referred to as finding aids, catalogs, and even book footnotes to find documents. So finding aids are often these documents that would be located in an archive, and they look like catalogs. There'll be a list of items that might be held by the archive. Sometimes it's just a single line. Other times it's a fairly detailed transcript. But these are often just documents that are available locally in that archive. And this is what's so special about, I think, working as an archivist or a historian archivist in this matter is that we expect, I think, in this age that you can find so much on the internet. And generally that just isn't the case when we speak of Spanish manuscripts. It would be difficult to ascertain what percentage of manuscripts in Spain are online, although the Ministry of Culture does have its own Pares search website for documents that are in its state archives. It is relatively limited. There are really excellent indices that you can use, but it's not complete, and certainly it is only a finding aid at times. My best guess might be that only 10% of the documents that are in some of the archives, and even at the national level, are available digitally and through the internet. Now, this is changing very rapidly and improving every day, but it just gives you a sense of it's the tip of the iceberg. Now, I would just mention my own expertise and experiences in about 38 archives and libraries in Spain and Latin America. I do pride myself on being an archivist, kind of historian. I love that challenge of entering into the archives, and each is very unique, requires a great deal of patience, and it enforces a certain type of humility, because I think as any historian will reflect with you, reflect on the process of searching for documents in an archive is, we often feel like frauds when we walk in the door. And by that, I mean the first day you walk into an archive, and I'm going to bring up an image now. This is Siminancas in Valladolid. But the first day you walk into an archive, you're completely disoriented. You're disoriented by what are the protocols and procedures for entering the archive. Does it require letters of introduction? How do you prove who you are? Now, this has changed a bit in Spain. with passage of new laws that grant access to the archives to just about everybody and the general public. But not long ago, you would need to come in with letters of presentation, a good curriculum vitae, and other materials to really demonstrate that you were a serious scholar. Once you've gotten in the door, you've got to find a seat. And often this can be a difficult thing in the National Archives. For instance, in the Archivo General de Indias in Sevilla, it's a common joke, I think, among archivists that, you want to arrive early because there's so few seats. And that's because it is, the most important archive for the Americas if you're looking in colonial Spanish America. And so one of the things that I'm laughing about this, but it's quite horrible that folks will do, is that you will arrive as early as you can when the archive is opening and immediately, get your seat. And then as soon as you've got a guaranteed seat, you walk right back out the door and go grab a cafe. You go back out and get a quick coffee so that you can wake up properly. And that's necessary. Not the coffee, but it's necessary to get in the door early because very quickly there will be a line set up where people will be sitting on a bench downstairs waiting to go upstairs because there's no seats available for the day. So once you've got in the door, now that you've got your seat, that's a wonderful thing. You start to look through finding aids, these kind of collections of books that will tell you what's available. And, sometimes it's a general line that would just say, potentially just an investigation from 1431. And you're not really sure what's there. And you'll now open the document and begin the process of reading through what is there. And the script is always different. It's always changing. There are different, what we would call hands at work here, different hands writing these letters. And that's where the part where the fraud kind of comes in, where you feel like, am I a proper scholar? Can I do this? And I know every scholar feels this way as they try to figure out what are the letters that are on the page? What are the numbers? What is this document about? So I just want to share that little piece there about, and that kind of enforces that type of humility. Probably the most important aspect of the hunt for documents are archivists. They are historians and genealogists and all those persons that are interested in this type of history. They're our best friends, and you can't do it without them. They know these documents inside and out. They know how they're organized. They are, wonderful stewards, and my hat goes. I take my hat off to them every day because they're quite impressive. So let's just talk a little bit about these archives and libraries. And I wanted to highlight the General Archive of Simancas because for one very, very important reason. And that is, we often talk about in history the idea of those archives with integrity and those without integrity. Now, I'm not saying that archives in general or some archives are not solid or good archives, but it's the issue of when were these documents accumulated in this building and for what purposes? And so this is a really interesting point, which is the very first archive that was organized in Spain specifically for the purpose of saving documents and being organized, as opposed to documents that are just kind of collected for this process. As far as we know, the first national one was the General Archive of the Simancas, and just reading from their website, we can learn a little bit about it, and it tells you what's so special then. In the last third of the 15th century, in the middle of the conflicts between warring noble families, one of these powerful families, the Almirantes of Castile, built a castle in the historic town of Simancas, close to Valladolid. The Catholic monarchs, in line with their policy of controlling the nobility, demanded that the Enriques relinquish the fortress, which is how it was transferred to the crown. It was Carlos V, Charles V, who, on 16 September 1540, following the suppression of the rebel movement, consolidated royal power, and with the monarch's administrative apparatus in place, ordered the creation of this institution. And specifically, important set of documents was to be kept in one of the turrets of the tower, which was being made specifically for this purpose. This action of the emperor, however, did not extend beyond gathering together in the newly created archive a small set of documents that had been scattered across the kingdom of Castile. The real executor of the Simeonicus archive, fully aware of the importance and significance of the archive project, was Philip II, or Felipe II, who clearly saw the government of an empire must be assured of the control of written documents, the only means by which information was received and orders issued. In order to achieve this objective, he had a building constructed and regulations enacted. In 1572, he ordered Juan de Herrera to draw up designs on what would become the first building in the modern era to be constructed as an archive. And in 1588, he signed an instruction that is considered to be the first ever regulation for archives in the world. So this is Simeonicus, and it is an incredibly important building because it is, in many ways, one of these first archives with a type of integrity in the sense that it was built for the purposes of storing and organizing these documents. So that's one of the national archives. Another one that we can consider, and one that I cut my teeth on, was the Archive Histórico Nacional Sección Nobleza, so the National Historic Archive, the Nobility section in Toledo, a great source of family documents. We can also consider provincial archives. Another one that I've worked in is this one, the Archivo Histórico Provincial, this one is located in Zamora. A top staff, wonderful folks, very helpful. And again, it's the point is at that state level, that provincial level, another collection of documents. We can also continue on and then start to think about municipal archives. So in this case, this is in the city of Béjar, and this is their cultural center. There's the regular library located here, as well as the municipal archive. So, as we move further down, there are all these different caches of documents. And in many cases, each institution has a range of documents. So there's not one-stop shopping. You can't just go to one place to do research. You actually need to crisscross the country and go to different locations to really start to piece together history. Hence the reason why I found myself working in 38 archives over the last 10 years. And this is an ecclesiastical archive. This is the ecclesiastical diocesanal archive, or I should say it's the cathedral archive for the city of Ciudad Rodrigo, a wonderful institution. And the chances I've had the opportunity to work there were wonderful. Again, we can consider these ecclesiastical church archives. And the last category that I would kind of mention is something it's difficult to kind of really properly describe, which would be something like the Real Academia de la Historia, so the Royal Academy of History, which is located in Madrid. So it is the Royal Academy, and in that sense, it is an institution that is, that hovers between these two places of, a state enterprise, but we now know that, that Spain is a modern republic. In this respect, the Royal Academy is somewhat of a private institution because it has its own rules and regulations and is managed by its own institutional leaders, and it's not part of the official state archive system. But it has so many state papers, so it's another kind of exceptional kind of place to work in. The last thing I would probably mention about working in the hunt for documents, and I'm bringing up this picture from inside a small archive in Spain that I worked, is that it's relatively unglamorous. There, in essence, you find yourself sitting at a table quietly. Maybe if you're lucky enough, they will sit you near the stacks of documents. And what you're seeing are these cajas, these boxes of documents. Now, you wouldn't be allowed to go in there and touch anything. The archivist will specifically go pull a document for you. And generally, they'll bring you 1 to 3 documents at a time and nothing more. That is a standard procedure. Generally, the more strict institutions will require just allowing you to use one document at a time. And of course, no pens close by. Sometimes you will be required to wear gloves. Sometimes you'll be required to wear a mask. This is more typical outside of Spain and Latin America. Other times, it's relatively easygoing, where they will bring you more than one or two documents. So they'll bring you a large legajo, or a cache of these documents, and you can start to go through them. But it's a slow and painstaking process of turning pages, and it's quiet, and it's probably one of my favorite times of work is just to be there with the documents and realize that I'm interacting with them. So let's look at a couple things relating to royal documents. So royal documents, and I'm just wanting to kind of categorize a couple documents for you so you can fully appreciate them. Royal documents were those that were prepared at the royal court or locally by a royal administrator. These include like royal decrees, laws, investigations, prohibitions, and types of agreements. So I'm going to bring up a document for you to take a look at real quick. This is a document from the Archivo Municipal de Burgos that I've worked in. And I just wanted to give you a sense of, what do you encounter when you walk into an archive and start to experience the documents. So often there'll be a folder or a cover page that might go around your original document, and it might have a small little description written here. And here you can see the signatura, so signatura numero, and it says section history number 12. So that is the actual column number we might think of, or signature reference. And it might give you a date of 1476, enero, January the 30th, and said that it was being created in Burgos. And this one was a kind of an interesting one that I wanted to pull out because it relates back to Plasencia, where we're doing work, but it also relates to a very important historical figure. I'll ask you to start thinking about who was the Queen of Spain in 1476, or I should say the Queen of Castile and Leon. In this case, it is a cedula from the Queen, and specifically where she is indicating that she will not give the fortress in Burgos, the Castillo, or she will not relinquish it to the Dukes of Plasencia or to anyone, and that she will basically guard it or care for it as her royal personage. And this is an important thing because we see, certainly during the 1400s and certainly in the early 1500s, this classical kind of like challenge between royal authority and noble authority, that certainly the king or the queen and that royal family has the most authority, and they're trying to enforce it over their noble lords. But in Spain during the 1400s, and definitely during the early 1500s as well, we do have, the grand nobility, the grandeza, that was incredibly powerful. So, it starts to give you an indication of that kind of tension that exists inside Spain in the 1400s in terms of the king or the royals and their ability to enforce their authority in relationship to dukes that would be, technically below them, but very, very powerful. And we can look at another document here. This is the next inside cover page. And here we see this is a more modern handwriting. So it indicates, Burgos, 1476. And this is an exterior page before we even get to the manuscript itself, giving us a little bit more information about the document, what we're going to see inside. So again, to give you a sense of what it's like to open up these documents. Then we might actually make it to the original document, and this would be the outside of it. So on the other flip side of this item, it would be the actual document, and this is the outside of what appears to be somewhat like a letter here. And you can see the fold lines. So you see these horizontal and vertical lines. You can see how the document may have been folded at one time and communicated to a different or distributed to a place or sent to a different place so that its contents were secure. There would be a little note on the outside saying who was directed to. You also see sometimes some little notes in the upper right hand corner. You'll see this the scratching out of writing. So this was probably a later hand at work here where someone was starting to categorize what document is this. but was not the original information on it. And then lastly, we can open up the document itself and see it in its glory. Now, this is a photocopy that I've taken a picture of. In this case, it was better to use the photocopy in Burgos. And often we might want to do that if there's a good copy, whether it's microfilm or paper. Sometimes we prefer to use those so that we can preserve the originals. And here, all I wanted to point out to you is just the signature at the bottom. And I love this about monarchs. So the bottom of the document is just signed Yo la Reina, which is fascinating. Literally saying this is signed off by me, the Queen. And 1476, this would be Queen Isabella. So what about another set of documents that we can consider? Municipal documents. Or wait, are they royal documents? So let's think about this for a second. So official municipal records could be generated by local governing nobles who represented the monarchy's interests. These leaders, royally appointed as corregidores or local councilmen, would rule in the king's or queen's name. As local leaders, they issued edicts, signed contracts, conducted meetings, and even investigated crimes. So it's somewhat of a misnomer almost to describe them as municipal records, because the ultimate secular authority in the land was the king or queen. So these records are thus another form of royal documentation. Now, municipal, we call them often maybe municipal records because they're located in municipalities. So whether that's in the Ayuntamiento de Plasencia or the Ayuntamiento de Ciudad Rodrigo, in their archival section. But, they are actually documents often being generated by royally appointed officials during the 1400s. So I did want to take a closer look at one, and this is from Plasencia from 1431, and it's a royal investigation. And I'm going to start to underline some materials for you so you can just see as we dive into this document. So here, this is expediente, and it is sin numero, meaning without a number. So it doesn't actually have a catalog number. And then on the outside, you can see this handwriting, pesquisa hecha por Miguel Sánchez de Sepúlveda, corregidor de la ciudad de Plasencia. So this is actually an investigation that was conducted by Miguel Sánchez de Sepúlveda, who was a corregidor for the city. So this is that outer jacket before we even get to the document that we're looking at. And then we can take another look here. Now, when we open up the document, we're going to find another cover page. And what's quite interesting about these is that you start to see the history of documents here. So one, let's take a look at the top. As you see NO 15, so numero 15. So at one time, it was referred to as document number 15. But then you also see there's another scratch out to the right of that, which is NO numero 18. So this is interesting because the numbers have changed on the documentation. And so this can be a real challenge for any historian or any genealogist is out there. You might have a good reference from a footnote to a document maybe from 100 years ago, but the naming, the numbering conventions have changed since then. So it can be quite a hunt. And here again, we can see pesquisa hecha por Miguel Sánchez. So this is an earlier archivist probably, or someone who was organizing the documents, had written this as a little cover page. And what's interesting also at the bottom, and I'm not sure what's going on here, is you see in parentheses halfway through the bottom of the page, below this kind of like floor, this little drawing, you'll see in parentheses VISTO, vista, meaning I've seen this. So what's curious is you kind of wonder, okay, at some point in time, either an archivist or a researcher was working through the document and they were keeping notes literally on the outside of the document saying, oh, I've seen this, so I don't need to go back and look at it. This is generally a no-no in the modern world, and we don't want to mark up documents if at all possible. But it's very common to find them marked up. And in some cases, this can be a good thing as long as you're not adding to it. You can use other person's notes to kind of help direct you through the document. So in this particular royal investigation. Now we're going to actually get to the front of the document. So now we're looking at the document from the 1431. And in this case, this may or may not be from the 1400s. I believe this is probably more 1500s, but it's hard to say. I generally just don't think about what time period exactly what I'm looking at this point in time. If I'm looking at the cover, I'm not really even looking at the document yet. Often these kind of summaries can be actually very misleading. So someone else might have read the document and took some notes or made a description of it, but it might not be right. So it's a place to start, but we can't really count on this yet. And again, you can see, oh, look, now we have a numero 22 or 22. So we have now 15, 18, and 22 all as references to this document. And again, you can see this pesquisa hecha por Miguel Sanchez. And we're starting to move further back in time with these with the handwriting. So now you will know that none of that was really original. Here's the original document. Now this document is a photograph. It is of paper, and this is that moment of truth when a historian sits down at the desk and feels they are a complete fraud, and that's because, my gosh, how would I ever begin to make my way through this document? Well, this is where we do have the benefit of prior scholars who might have been doing some work here, and often we're eternally grateful to them. So we do know some names that had shown up in this document. We had some dates. We know where this was created. And so in many cases, and we'll be doing this later on in the course in terms of starting to think about how we approach paleography in terms of interpreting documents. But in this case, I'm going to point out a couple ways of how I approach paleography, and that's to kind of figure out what is the cipher here? What are some clues to the document? So the first one that I can think about, and this is just where my eye naturally gravitates to, I see right away, I can see a MY looks like LL. And I know there's a dating here, and I know, oh, 1000. Oh, 1000. 1000. Oh, 1400. Oh, this is my first place I'm starting. So now I start to know what an M and an I and an L looks like. So 1000. Next, I know, okay, it's in the 14th century, right? During the 1400s, the 15th century. My apologies. There is a Q. Looks like probably a T and R O. So cuatro. Maybe cuatrocientos here. Oh yeah, 1400. All right. So now I'm starting to see some of the recognizable features of these letters that we showed a little bit earlier. I now start to know, what does an M look like? What does a Q look like? What does an R look like? What kind of abbreviations are starting to be used by this particular hand? Next, okay, so I know that M, and I know this guy's name is Miguel. Oh, there it is. So now I've underlined Miguel. So M-I-G-L maybe. But again, we know that we're probably looking at some type of abbreviation, but we can very clearly start to make out, oh, this is Miguel Sanchez, S-A-N-C, maybe H-S, Sanchez. And then we'll see Sepulveda, S-E-P. So this is how we start to unwrap the document, or figure out what is going on here. We did have some names that we can work with, so I start to know I need to look for Miguel Sanchez de Sepulveda because I know he's here, and if I find his name, I will be able to use his name as the tool to decipher the document. And lastly, because I know where I'm at, and just to pick up a couple other letters, I'm going to find Plasencia, Plasencia. Yes. So that is the original document. Now, sometimes we get really quite lucky when we even have a modern historian who has maybe worked in the last 50 years, and this one is pretty recent, who has been going through the document and looking for information. And I'm always grateful for these folks who have left their notes behind. And I am kind of laughing about this because it really does give you a sense of how much we are so dependent on the work of others before us. It's only through successive efforts of like interpreting, rereading documents that we start to really understand the history. And so, this is someone who has done some work for me, and I'm eternally grateful to them. So now what I can see on this note card that someone left behind was, it says here underlined FOL 14V. Oh, that's a reference to folio, so basically page number 14V. So vuelto. So that V stands for the opposite side of the document. So if it was folio 14, that would be the front side of the document. 14V, vuelto, would be the back side of the document. And in this case, we know that it's a reference to Rebbe, so rabbi. And this is another piece that we should appreciate, that, there are no common necessarily, specific spellings of words and names and things like that. There's a lot of fluidity here. So you have to be fairly flexible in this way of what you're reading. It says Rebbe, so rabbi, Abraha, and then it says comma Judío. So this is another feature that we'll find inside of these documents is, one, we see this abbreviation, right? Abraha, so probably Abraham, and then Judío. So often in most of the documents we'll be looking at, when someone is not a Christian, if they're Jewish or if they're a Muslim, it will indicate in the document. This is very common during the 1400s, especially in Plasencia, and we don't have to guess about people's religious status in that way. One of the other features that is showing up here is that you see this modern scholar has actually been very kind to us because they've put in some commas. So it says Rabbi Abraha, comma, Judío, comma. Another feature that you will notice in most of the documents we look through is the absence of any type of punctuation. You won't find commas. You won't find periods. There's just be long strings of words. Often there might be a et, literally kind of meaning and, in the middle of a phrase, and just, almost might be indicating a new phrase is starting a new sentence almost. But, those types of conventions just don't seem to exist in this time period. And that's just another piece that makes it a little bit more challenging to read. Lastly, what's very interesting about this record is we see down here below. So Rabbi Abraham, who was a Jewish, obviously, if he's a rabbi, he was llevaron preso a la villa de Oropesa. So he was taken like a, and I've translated this so many times now, I'm getting stuck here. He was taken basically, as prisoner to the city, the little village of Oropesa. And it's Oropesa, I believe. But this looks like almost an abbreviation in a modern handwriting. So this is interesting. So this is a royal investigation being conducted by Miguel Sanchez de Sepúlveda, who is one of the local royal corregidores, councilmen, and he is investigating something that's related to a Jewish individual, Rabbi Abraham, who was actually carried off, probably in chains. Actually, I know this record quite well. He was taken off in chains and shackles and taken to the city of Oropesa. And this is during a pretty significant conflict that involved the municipality, the cathedral, and some local lords in Plasencia, specifically like seigneurial lords. These are lords that kind of had their own authority to rule in their own regions that were very close by to Plasencia. And as you can imagine, lots of people got caught in the middle. Often Jews found themselves in the middle of conflicts, and as well as commoners. So let's go ahead and take a look at the original document again. Okay, lots of words swimming on the page. But again, we had the benefit of those notes from previous person who had worked here, as well as we already started to create our cipher to figure out what are different letters that we could see. So I'm going to start to unravel this. Here we go. Rabbi Abraham Judío. Okay. Llevaron preso villa de Oropesa. Okay. So I made that look really incredibly easy. This takes a long time. It doesn't happen this fast. Often I might read one page, and this is just the upper third of a page. I might read it 3 or 4 times before I really feel comfortable with what I'm reading. So, and I will read a document 2 or 3 times so I can finally get to the point where I feel like, okay, this is definitely what's occurring in the document. There might be some issues with grammar and syntax. There might be unusual words that are being used because of a different vocabulary from the time periods, but I can have a general understanding of it. But this is that process of, of recognizing maybe I'm not a fraud, and I do know what I'm doing. And in this way, I think all of us can be good historians. We just work at it. All of us. You keep on working at it. You keep on reading, and you try again. So the last two set of documents I'm going to cover were really church documents and then some private documents. I'm just going to show these really quickly because we're going to spend a lot of time with church documents in the next couple of weeks. And these were, official ecclesiastical documentation prepared by local cathedral or church governing bodies. So they would produce books of acts or local community activities. There might be a property censuses in them, religious endowments where a person's giving money or property or donations to have masses said in their memory, contracts for services, property sales and leases, investigations, everything. And again, the important piece here to remember is that kind of separation of authority. So we have the ultimate secular authority in the realm, which would be the king. We have some delegated authority that would flow down to the municipality, which is again representing the king's interest, the corregidores. And then we might even have some of those señorial lords, those regional lords that kind of have some of their own authority. On the other side, we would have ecclesiastical authority and church authority, its own court system, its own process of dealing with issues. And in here, what we're seeing is, and I'm just going to read this to you and then I'll translate it. So this is from Folio 101, and this is from the Actas Capitulares in Plasencia, or the Capitulary Acts. And this is book 1, the traslado, or the transcribed version. And it says, Este día arrendo del dicho cabildo, Juan González organero un parral que ha a la dehesea de los caballos. And so what it's saying is, on this day, the said church council cabildo rented to Juan González, the organist, un parral, which is actually a vineyard, that was located in the meadow or pasture of the horses. So this is actually a property lease, and it's a churchman who is leasing a vineyard from the church, potentially for his own personal use, or more likely to produce wine and to sell that wine. So that's pretty interesting. So we're going to be spending a lot of time with those in the future, so we're just going to skip along right now and go on to private documents. And this one is the piece de resistance, if that's the correct way to say that. But this is just the pinnacle of interest here, and are these private documents. So I would describe these as personal and family legal instruments. Many of us have these already, and they're often called last wills or testaments, or documents that are added after those, codicils. These are enhancements or changes to the will. Dowry letter, so when a woman might be marrying a man, she would have her dowry that come with her, but also would specify her rights and privileges with her land and real property sales and leases, property inventories, and religious endowments. So those are private documents that are being created by elites in society, and as you can imagine, in Spain, we really don't see notarial archives until the 1500s. So in the 1400s, the period I mostly work in, we're finding like these kind of private documents actually being prepared by secular as well as ecclesiastical notaries. Mostly, ecclesiastical notaries who are working for the church, and then they would prepare these documents for individuals. But I chose this one specifically because it is one of the most unique documents I've ever encountered in Plasencia and in Spain, and it's quite wonderful. So in this one, we can see a couple pieces. One says, and I'm going to let this highlight real quickly, Carta de Venta. So this is a letter of sale, and it's que hizo, so it was made by. Doña, so lady, Velida. And what is it for? Oh, it's for some casas, las casas, so houses. And where are they located? Oh, they're located in Calle de Rua. So this is Calle de Rua or Calle de Zapateria in Plasencia. And well, who are these houses sold to? Oh, they're sold to Salomon Abenabibi Hubitero. Now, what's very interesting about Solomon Abenabibi Hubitero, Solomon Abenabibi is a Jewish individual. He is a hubitero, or a chainmail maker or armor maker who lived in Plasencia. So when I first encountered this document, I was like, wow, this is pretty neat. This is one of those outer pages that you're starting to open up and look through. And then I finally thought, okay, I'm finding the original document now. Now, don't get terrified when you see this, that it is a difficult document to read. This is from 1461, so we can be very thankful to someone who's written in the upper left-hand corner in pencil 1461, who has dated the document for us. This is you can see now in red lettering above. This is from Lagajo 1, numero 45. So, and then at the bottom of the page, you can see, oh, there's this big stamp. So like that giant hand pointing to numero 45, so 45. And then you can see some earlier individual, researcher or archivist, or we're just not really sure, has actually used a red pencil to kind of mark up this document and underline important sections. Often names are underlined, dates are underlined, specific amounts are underlined, and these are kind of part of that cipher process where you figure out what's going on in the document. So now I was pretty excited when I found this document. Oh, like this is pretty interesting. I've a Jewish arms maker, and he's buying this piece of property from a lady Velida. This is pretty interesting. And we'll just take a closer look at it real quickly. I'm going to highlight a small section of it. And so when I looked at the document, and this wasn't on the outside of the document, that the little small description of it, Don Velida. Also now it's referring to a person here by the name of Yusef Abenataf. Oh, or Abenatas. Again, I don't need to be certain at this moment, but Yusef is the name Joseph. And in this case, we know, again, from the record, that Yusef was a Jewish individual. And then it sounds like what's interesting, he's selling, vendemos, we are selling a vos to you, Solomon Abenabibi Hubitero. So wait a second. So the outside of the document that was, had some script on it, refers to Doña Velida, I believe. And then as we open up the document, the actual document itself, we see, oh, Yusef Abenataf. Okay, so it sounds like he's selling the property, and there's a reference here to a brother. And again, this might have been, some family relationship, but it's starting to become even a more interesting document, because we're seeing now like, oh, this is a private document. It appears to be one Jewish individual selling a piece of property to another Jewish individual. So like, well, this is very intriguing, because we have a Castilian Spanish document from the 1400s that is a transaction between two Jewish individuals. It is being prepared by a Christian notary. And where did they find it appropriate potentially to save this document? Well, it was located in the Cathedral of Plasencia. Now, the Cathedral of Plasencia, it's hard to say whether this document is deposited later on or by these individuals, but I do think it's very interesting that we would find Jewish individuals depositing documents there for safekeeping. It would make good sense, because it's a good long-term storage place and a safe place. So I'm pretty excited about this document at this moment as I'm looking through it. And then I got really excited, and this is the only one I've ever seen in Plasencia, but they do exist at other places. And this is when I realized this document is pretty special, because on the outside we had the cover page, then we had the Castilian version in Spanish detailing the private sale, and then on the inside there's the original Hebrew as well. So apparently this is a very interesting agreement of sale of a property between two Jewish individuals. And not only did they generate the document in Castilian Spanish, but they generated it in Hebrew as well. pretty interesting that you kind of have that type of coexistence of these two documents alongside of each other inside the Cathedral of Plasencia. So, and I will just show this last page for you to see, which is just kind of showing, the Hebrew document is inserted in the middle of this document, and then you can see the transaction is obviously in Castilian Spanish, where people can still read it from that time period. And then we have a notary's mark over there on the right-hand side, which kind of looks like a X with some curlicues around it. So that's where I'm going to conclude this discussion today. And I hope that you found it beneficial to kind of see this evolution of alphabets, the development of the scripts, how parchment is prepared, the process of hunting for documents and going through archives, and finally just exploring a couple of the different types of documents that are out there and starting to kind of get a feel for what the paleography looks like. Now, remember, we won't be doing paleography that is this difficult as the one you're looking at this moment. You'll be doing, most of y'all will be approaching the documents from the early 1800s that are a transcription of the original 1400s document. So you'll be able to help in many ways with that version, because it's very readable, but there will be abbreviations that you'll have to learn about. And some of you might even decide to take on the original, and we're going to have some of those available for you as well. All right. Thank you for your time.